So yeah, we will be having a look at how can we combine storytelling and systems mapping to approach complex challenges. We already had a look at the check-in together. What is this experience with systems mapping and storytelling that we have in the room? And from there, we will go to a bit of an introduction. What is actually systems mapping? What is storytelling? Why would we want to combine the two with each other? And from there, I will tell you a bit more practically about the process. What does the systems mapping process look like? How can systems mapping fit in with that? And from there, we will have 2 breakout sessions where you really get to practice these steps yourself. So I set up a small exercise for you where you have a couple of stories that you can work with, see, okay, how can we take out the variables from these stories? How can we combine them into systems map? And then in the second breakout room, we will look at how can we find, going from very specific stories from individual people, how can we find kind of the overlying system stories? And from there, how can we actually change the narrative? So between each of these breakout session exercises, we will meet together in the plenary again. I will show you and talk a little bit about examples and methods. How can we go about this in practice? What does that look like? There will be room for questions at that point. And then after the second exercise, I will invite you to share kind of the results of the exercise. How did it go? And again, there's more room for questions and to discuss examples. So then for now, I will one more time share the link to the Miro board for new people. I see someone is asking if there's a way to get these slides afterwards. So the Miro board that you're working on now, you will still have access to that after the session ends. So you can continue to refer to that to read the content there. So first, to get started with what is actually systems mapping? And yeah, we can break that down into what is actually a system and what does it mean to map a system. So one definition that I like to work with for what is a system is that anytime components interact with each other in a way that results in a behavior that is greater than the sum of the parts, they form a system. So when we talk about a system, we see it consists of multiple components. They are interacting with each other in some way. And from that interaction between the components results an overall behavior of the system. And here you see, another characteristic of systems is that they tend to be nested. So if we talk about a component, what we're looking at really depends on the level of detail that we're looking at. So for example, at one level, we might look at a person as one component, but we could also zoom into one person and look at, okay, what are the organs that this person is made up of? What are the cells that the organs are made up of? So this is kind of this zooming in, zooming out, looking at different levels that we will often find ourselves doing when we are working with systems. And then, kind of a simple checking question. If we are wondering, this thing that I'm dealing with, is that a system or not? We can ask ourselves, okay, if I were to cut this thing in half, do I get 2 of the same thing, or is it something different? For example, if I cut a pile of sand in half, we now just have 2 piles of sand, but they're still kind of the same thing. Or the same, if we rip a piece of paper, we now basically have 2 pieces of paper. But if you think about cutting a cow in half, now these 2 pieces are not going to show the same behavior anymore as the whole cow or the whole family or the whole bicycle. And then looking into what is actually a systems map. So here, yeah, it's maybe good to mention there's not really a consensus on the definition of systems mapping. But my working definition is that a systems map is visualization that helps us to think about how a system would react to changes in its structure or the level of variables. So again, looking at the components, looking at variables, and how they are connected to each other and visualizing that. Then we might ask ourselves, okay, what can we actually use systems mapping for? So I think the most common use is we want to change a complex system and we need to find places where we can intervene to make that change happen. So that's, yeah, all about intervention. But we can also use systems mapping for impact assessment. So that's kind of the other way around. We know a change is going to happen, but we need to better understand, okay, how will the system react to that? What is going to happen with the behavior of the system? And then we can also use it really more practically. So maybe we need to coordinate multiple people for a certain task that we try to do together. We need to coordinate resource flows. So it really helps to get a better understanding of how the system is put together. And then finally, systems mapping can really help us to support communication in complexity. So, and sometimes that can be about, okay, we need to explain to others what is happening within the system in order to get them along with taking certain kinds of actions. And you will see that often these four purposes, if you go through a systems change process, yeah, they will all kind of come into play. Because once you make decisions about the kind of interventions that you want to make, then you also, again, need to think about, okay, what's the impact of that? Then when you really want to make it practical, you need to think about, okay, how can we coordinate ourselves and our resource flow to actually make that happen? And you need to communicate all of that to others. Then the other method that we are looking at is, of course, storytelling. And here we are looking at storytelling more specifically in the context of systems change. So we're not talking about stories for entertainment that we're inventing, but more specifically stories as a description of someone's personal experience in life. And here I'm very curious to hear from you. What do you think are the purposes that we tell stories for and that we listen to stories for? So for which purposes do we tell and listen to stories about personal experiences? And again, yeah, you can grab your sticky notes and share your ideas on the board. And I see, a lot of ideas already. Some are around, sharing knowledge, sharing learning, to engage with each other, to connect to each other, but also to drive change, to find common ground, to make things more relatable, to think about our own biases, for social innovation, to imagine other options, indeed. So yeah, definitely a lot of different things that we use storytelling for as humans. So also here my collection is definitely not complete. So I was saying indeed for social connection, for knowledge sharing, to better be able to meet needs or have our needs met because we are able to communicate or understand each other's needs and communicate or understand the impact that our actions are having on others, and to improve our cooperation with each other. And from there, we want to think about, are storytelling and systems mapping actually complementary approaches? And in order to explore that, it helps to think about, okay, what are actually the benefits of storytelling, but what are also the disadvantages of storytelling? And to do the same for systems mapping, what do we think are the benefits of systems mapping, and what are the disadvantages? And then from there we can see, okay, are some of the disadvantages of one method maybe balanced out by the other one? So again, you have a lot of ideas around this. So if we first look at the benefits of storytelling, yeah, they can be very engaging and impactful. They help to build connections. They can be very rich and in qualitative insights. Yeah, it engages our emotions. They're usually very relatable, can help to get buy-in, can show the interplay between things. It shows what role people play. And we're creating space for people's voices. We can show different perspectives. It can help us to get the attention of the audience when you tell stories. But if we look at the disadvantages of the stories, they can sometimes be too individual. We have to speak a particular language. They can be a bit lengthy sometimes. They tend to just follow a few characters, so there can be too much focus on individual people rather than the whole system. So it's very dependent on the specific individual's experience, which can lead to mislead us, and especially if we're only speaking to a certain population at a time. And we need to be aware of, okay, is this story based on opinions or on facts? And then for systems mapping, if we look at the benefits first, it helps us to see the bigger picture, to synthesize complexity, go beyond the linear way of seeing things. We can more easily see the relationships between variables. That helps us to find intervention points. We are looking at multiple players at the same time. But on the other hand, it can also sometimes be a bit too abstract. The scope can be very broad. We can get into analysis paralysis because there's kind of too much going on. Can be time consuming. So then if we put these kind of next to each other, what I did here is to see, okay, how can these two methods actually complement each other? So if we look at the benefits of storytelling, they are very personal, these stories, which makes them relatable, as you mentioned. They're emotional, which can balance out, on the other side, the disadvantage of systems mapping, that it can sometimes be more impersonal because you're bringing together multiple stories and then from there kind of summarizing that into one bigger picture. Stories are also very specific. They can be very practical, where a systems map can seem more theoretical at first. And stories tend to be relatively easy to follow. Humans are really built to understand stories, where if we're working with a systems map, that definitely tends to be a little bit more challenging to follow that kind of logic. And then on the other hand, the disadvantages of storytelling are that we are just focusing on one specific perspective, which can make it difficult to see the bigger picture and to understand, okay, how do all of these stories come together? So that's where systems mapping can help us to provide that overview, which allows us to see the patterns that are going on by really connecting all of these perspectives from the different stakeholders to each other. So that's really why we want to combine these two methods. There are some rogue sticky notes here. And yeah, from there, we of course need to think about, okay, really practically, how do we go about that? How do we connect the method of systems mapping to the different approaches that are out there for storytelling? So first, looking a bit at, okay, what does a typical systems mapping process look like? So usually we want to start this process by really clearly define, okay, what is the purpose of this process that we are going into? What do we want to achieve with this? Who is involved in it? What do we want to do together? From there, we can start to gather information about the system. And this information can come from many different places. This can be already existing literature, research that we are doing. Or for example, that we can get that information through storytelling. Once we have gathered this information, then we of course need to actually structure and connect all of these things into a systems map. And from there, we can then identify what are the patterns, what does this mean for the system, and where are the places to intervene, what kind of actions can we take to change the system in the direction we want it to go. And here, of course, you see this is not a simple four-step process, but there will be many loops between these activities. So we want to always check back in with our purpose multiple times. We're going to move between structuring information and gathering information many times. So once we have a first structure, it becomes easier to tell, okay, where's information missing? Where can we find that information? And eventually go to drawing conclusions from there. Then when we want to bring storytelling into this process, this is what that can look like. So for the gathering information step specifically, we can use storytelling. And from there, we can come together to make sense of these stories. We can then combine the stories into a systems map. We might kind of loop back to together discuss, okay, what are the gaps in the map? Where do we want to fill in more information? And from there, we can then have a look at, okay, what are the patterns that we see? What are the kind of higher level stories that are taking place within the system? And from there, we can think about, okay, how can we change that narrative? So if we're looking at individual patterns, individual stories that are taking place within the system, what changes are needed? And the two exercises we will go through in a moment are specifically to practice these steps. So I have prepared some simple stories for you. And in the first exercise, we will go through that, the making sense and connecting. And then in the second part, we will look at, okay, how can we find these patterns and how can we then change them? One more kind of piece of information before going into those exercises is to get a bit of an understanding of, okay, I've been talking about variables, but what actually is a variable? So a variable, really simply said, is something that can increase or decrease over time. So you will often hear these kind of descriptive words, or we are looking at the levels of something, the number of something, the intensity of something, the frequency at which something happens. And then, of course, we want to look at, okay, how do these variables influence each other? So there are two kind of main ways that they can influence each other. So when two variables are connected to each other, they can either move together in the same direction, or they can move in opposite directions. So here you see the two simple examples. So if we're looking at the number of rabbits in an ecosystem, the more rabbits there are, the more food there is for foxes, so the more foxes we can have. Or another one would be, okay, if the psychological safety increases, then the willingness to be vulnerable within a group can also increase. Or then the other way around, if the number of rabbits increase, then the amount of available rabbit food is decreasing. So this, to give you as a bit more background information before going into the exercise. So then very specifically looking, how does this exercise work? So here you see I have prepared a couple of example stories, which these are stories that I have invented in a way, but they're very much based on similar stories that we have been hearing working with companies, working with teams, helping them to understand the patterns that are taking place within those groups of people. So the assignment for you is to, when you find yourself in the breakout rooms, to first take turns, read these stories out loud. While you are listening, on sticky notes, write down, okay, what variables are being referred to in these stories. And then after you have extracted the variables from all of these stories, so you can write them down here, then you can copy them over into this space and start looking at okay, how are all of these variables connected to each other? How do things influence each other? And if you are feeling a little bit stuck at some point, I put, I see I locked this in the wrong way. So here you can move this little square and you can have a peek at example of what are the variables that are included here. And I can give you an example of one of the stories. So here, this is a relatively new manager of a team, and he's saying, okay, I've been getting a lot of complaints from my team about the level of work pressure, so I have decided to add a new team member to the team to alleviate the workload. I care about my team, so I took care of this as quickly as possible, and I found someone who I think will be a good fit for the team. So the variables that I'm hearing in here are, they're talking about the amount of complaints about the work pressure. They're talking about the amount of time that they're taking for the hiring process, and they're talking about the quality of the team composition. So then, it is up to you to go through the rest of the stories and have a look at, okay, what are the variables that we see there? And then from there, think about, okay, how do these variables influence each other? And see how you can combine all of these into a systems map. Okay, that was a lot of talking from my side. Do you have questions about this exercise before I send you into the breakout groups? No questions so far. Then for the timing, so I will put a timer on the Miro board. You have about 20 minutes for this exercise, and I will keep a little bit of an eye on, okay, how are you progressing? If I see you need more time, I might add a minute or two. If I see you're doing well and getting close to being finished, I may take a few minutes away. So just that you know how that works. You can always see the timer on the Miro board while you're working there. Hey, welcome back, everyone. I totally understand that this is not enough time to finish the map and discuss all the things, so don't worry about that. After the second exercise, I do want to more specifically ask each group to share a little bit. But for now, I'm just curious to hear from a couple of people just how did that go? How did it feel? Did you have any insights? Yeah, Sidesh, go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask, just a curious question. Are we part of the story? Because the story was about a team and we were a team doing things together. So it felt like we are part of it, I just want to convey that.
Yeah.
Also because there was a time limit. So less the time, more was, team cohesion was getting disturbed and we were not able to communicate too well because of the time. So I felt we were part of the systems map.
Yeah, you could observe your own team patterns
Yeah.
within that. Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fun exercise. It really gave good insights. Yeah.
Maybe I can add to that. What's always amazing is that it seems a big jumble, and suddenly the groupings emerge, and you do suddenly get a kind of a conceptual model, and suddenly it's starting to make sense. And it's almost like a tipping point. Before that, it looks totally like madness, and suddenly there is a real meta story developing.
Yeah.
That's always the magic of this.
Yeah. Any other observations?
I think one of the interesting things that we had just in the end was that we have different kind of scales. At one point we have like the collective scale, like what is everybody experiencing, and then what are the individual point of views of like individual people. And it was quite difficult to visualize those different scales in that simple tool right here. And the other one that is that, okay, we really have a wicked problem here. We really have a closed loop. Like you cannot really identify, oh, you have to do this thing now because that's the root cause. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. The group in The Hague, do you want to share something? How did it go on your side? For the rest of you, you can see there are a few pictures of what's going on in The Hague on the Miro board.
Yeah. Maybe you can put our picture up, Hannah, to share it, and then I'll ask someone here to tell something about it. Do I have a volunteer? Yes. Okay. Can you hear us, Hannah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure where. Yeah, and for now the idea is not to like go into the details of the map that you have, but just share a little bit about like how was the experience of doing that exercise.
We started with story 2, and then we jumped to 6, and then we combined 2 and 6 into one picture, just to get an idea of how, because all of these stories so mingle up also. So we tried to complicate it for ourselves and mix 2 stories and then make all the connections between those stories as well.
Yeah, and that is exactly the idea, that these stories, they're all in a way about the same event taking place, but every person sees that event from their own perspective and is influenced by it in a different way.
Literally. Yeah.
Then I would like to share a little bit about, okay, how, what does that look like in practice for projects that we have worked on? What are the different methods we can use there? So yeah, for example, there are of course different ways in which we can tell and collect these stories. So definitely what has happened in the past is to do just one-way interviews with the stakeholders in the system. But also it can be very nice to have like a two-way interviews. So 2 stakeholders from the system interview each other and hear each other's stories in that way. And of course, you can also share stories directly, more in a group setting with a bigger group directly. Or they can be shared first in written form through online tools and things like that. So here you see, in a bit more detail, one example case. I don't want to go into a lot of the details right now because I have talked about this specific example in more detail in a previous event. So you see here the YouTube link to that. So if you want to find a bit more about the specific case, you can have a look at that. But just to say, what we did here is that we combined interviews together with kind of this two-way people from the system interviewing each other, as well as then sharing each other's stories in groups, and then really having them interpret their stories together and do this exercise basically that you just did now to see, okay, what are the connections between the variables that came out of the stories that we have just told. And then looking at, once we have kind of a starting point of a map, then bringing that back to the group and having them see, okay, what is still missing? Where do we want to add things? What other patterns do we see? And here we can see a bit of the kind of how this map evolved. So also what you were saying before, that's, yeah, at the beginning, it will always go through a very messy stage, and then step by step, yeah, you can kind of see these patterns evolve, as well as in this specific case, we were looking at, yeah, you see the really detailed map, and then this version of the map that really shows, okay, this is the main flow that is happening within the map. So this, you could also tell kind of the overlying story of this map. How are people moving? In this case, this was about diversity and inclusion in engineering. So how are people moving through the system? Where do we lose people? Where do we gain diversity? So yeah, we want to think about, okay, how can we tell these stories, but then also how can we together make sense of these stories to combine them into a systems map and fill in the gaps. So also here in the interpretation of the stories, sometimes that will be kind of the expert. So for example, for the interviews in this case, I was the one going through all of these interviews and taking out, okay, what are the main variables, but then also giving those variables back to the stakeholders and having them work with that. But of course, you can also have people individually on their own read through the stories and start to make sense and start to have them talk about what they see. And then from there, yeah, bring that into the group sense making. And this group sense making can also happen synchronously. So you're in a room together, you're in a call together, or it can also happen asynchronously. This is, yeah, what we did for another example case where we set up a mirror board like this, and then in their own time, people could there go through the information, leave their comments, their observations, and then we take that along into a future workshop sessions where people come back together. And yeah, ideally, I think the best way is to kind of combine these three approaches. And it's always the kind of challenge to find the right balance between, okay, the experts doing some of the work, people doing kind of individual reading to prepare for group sessions, and then the things that happened in group sessions. Because yeah, the challenge is, if you want to do everything together with a large group, that is just going to take a lot of time. So you need to think about, okay, what can the expert take on? How can people prepare individually to kind of keep the momentum in the process? Then, yeah, I'm curious to hear from you if you have any questions around this first part of the process so far. Anything that you're wondering about? Yeah.
Yes.
Eric?
So how did you oh, sorry. I'll let you go
No,
first.
Jennifer, better go first.
Okay, sorry. Yes, thanks. I was wondering, how did you then decide which elements to put in the story? Did you use like storytelling structures at all, or did you just pick out a few of the core elements from the systems map?
I'm not quite understanding your question yet, because yeah, the initial stories come from the people, and then from there we get the variables, and then there together we identify, okay, what are the main patterns, and then we can describe those patterns in the form of telling a story.
All right, but then in the end, there is a story that combines all the information and insights, right? So there you come back to the story.
Yeah.
Like you start with interviewing and collecting stories, as it's often said, but then in the end, you create all of that, combine it into a new story, a collective story, right?
Yeah.
So within making that final story, do you use like storytelling tactics or a build up, a climax, and the outcome, for instance, So
yeah, no, I
go
see
about that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's definitely still kind of room for further developing this method. So at the moment, I am not thinking about the story about the pattern in that way. So it is more about, okay, we are now describing this pattern, but trying to find a simpler way than, okay, if this increases, then that increases, and then this goes down. But so it's maybe not a story from the perspective that you were saying, okay, what is the beginning, the start, and the end? Because yeah, it will be more of a circular story probably, but just to tap more into the style of storytelling to, as we were saying before, make it more engaging to talk about these patterns. Eric?
Yeah, my question super relates to that. It's basically just if in this workshop we're also going to translate the systems map that we just made into a new story. That's basically everything I want to ask.
That is indeed the next exercise, yes. So we will see how far you can come with that in the time we have today. Then another hand went down based on that.
Maybe, Hannah, can we answer a question of Jennifer with some experience from the field?
What do you mean?
No, I was just wondering about the question of Jennifer. One of the things that you can do to structure the stories into a collective story is to use the hero journey as a structure.
Yes, there's many structures. You can also use like the classic Aristotle structure of 3 parts in the story, where you could take the hero's journey, which has like 12 steps. I also use kind of a different approach to storytelling, which is more like you start from strategy, like where do you think the organization will be in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years, and translate that into a story. So there's different approaches for how to structure your story, definitely.
Yeah. Then Sidesh?
Yeah, so basically, I just wanted to validate as to what my thinking is when I think about system stories. So what I believe is initially when we are telling that we are taking stories from people, they are mostly at the event level. So I call them as event level stories. So I just wanted to validate whether what we are doing in this exercise is we are moving from event level stories to system stories.
Yeah.
And in the role of system stories is that we can create starting, middle, and end. That way is also another way which I never thought about. But systems stories also give us the capability of looking at subparts of that entire map and see what is happening and see those subsystem stories, and then look at what are the leverages based on those stories. This is what my understanding of this was. I just wanted to validate whether it's correct.
Yeah, that's also the way I look at it. So here would be one example of that. We have one big systems map where there are a lot of things going on, but then we are taking out a couple of these patterns to be able to more easily talk about them and then think about, okay, for this pattern, how can we intervene? while at the same time still always being able to go back to the whole thing and think about, okay, if we change something in this loop, how does that then affect the rest of the system? So then, yeah, I would propose that we actually move into the second part of the exercise. And yeah, here the idea is that, yeah, you basically for now choose one of these patterns that you see is happening. So one part of the whole story for now that you focus on. So from what you have on the left, see if you can take out one of the loops, one of the patterns or the dynamics that you want to have a closer look at. And then first you can show, okay, this is the current pattern taking place here. But then also think about, okay, how could we change this pattern? What can we add? What can we take away in order to change how this pattern behaves? So like, yeah, one really small element from that whole story that I took out as an example here is around this relationship between team cohesion and the team stability. So yeah, if the team cohesion is decreasing, then basically people are more likely to leave the team because they're not feeling so connected to the team and they might move on to a different job. So the team stability decreases, which then further decreases to the team cohesion because new people need to come in that might kind of disturb the team dynamic. And yeah, this is kind of the loop that this team and these stories are currently finding themselves in. That's, yeah, because team cohesion is decreasing, more and more people are leaving, new people are coming in, but team cohesion is not being improved. So these new people are also not staying long. But then, yeah, a kind of simple solution to this loop that you could think about is that now when the team observes, okay, the cohesion and the team is not going well, team cohesion is decreasing, then the agreements that we make is that if we observe that, then we will specifically focus more on different kind of measures to improve team cohesion. And then, yeah, as we see team cohesion improving, that of course also helps to improve team stability, again, improving team cohesion. And if we see, okay, everything is going well with team cohesion, we might be able to focus a little bit less on improving team cohesion in that time. So that's kind of how we might be able to change that pattern. Yeah, Sidesh?
Oh, I just wanted to as to are we is this the way of looking at to find ideal interventions, where so this will help us to design interventions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, have a look at what you have now. What is one of the patterns that you can maybe zoom into for now? And then for that one, think about, okay, how can we change this this current pattern? And then, yeah, once we come back, I will ask you if you can tell me the story of that new pattern that you came up with. Any questions before I send you back to your groups?
Do you have any specific, here I come with the storytelling again, but do you have any specific energy that you want us to give to the stories? Because you can tell an inspirational story, you can tell a story of doom, you can tell all kinds of stories. Is there anything
I will
systems thinking or systems mapping that you say, okay, look for these kinds of stories?
Yeah, I think for the new pattern, it would be aspirational, inspirational. This is something we want to move towards. But I'm very curious to, yeah, also hear more ideas from your expertise with storytelling and how to approach this. Okay, then I will open the rooms. I see some were still a little bit in the middle of finishing their sentences. Then, yeah, looking at the time, I would say let's jump straight in and start with group number 1. Who from the first group would like to share what you have worked on? Any volunteers from group number 1?
I could say a few things. I would say part of our conversation was looking at sort of the components. Like once we identify something like quality of onboarding as a significant variable here, then it starts leading to the conversation about what are the things that affect the quality of the onboarding experience. So when we ended up in a conversation where we were talking about leverage points, essentially saying, you know, are we talking about the things that are going to have the biggest impact? And one of our insights, you know, in looking at all the stories was that that there was a low sense of autonomy or control in almost everybody who was talked to. And so there was this sort of shroud hanging over this entire thing that we're thinking as we're working in this feedback loop of the quality of the onboarding and its effect on people's commitment and everything, that we're also thinking that there's a much larger effect, which is the commitment of the organization to coherence in the system, because it seems, you know. So anyway, we ended up in a conversation about that. So we were just looking at, you know, obviously if we can improve the quality of the onboarding, then that will improve the experience of new workers. But that's dependent on the people who build the onboarding process and organize it and make sure that it works. So that was sort of the essence of our conversation, and others can say if I've missed something.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then for group number 3, who would like to share? Who was in group number 3?
I'm in denial. I was not part of it. No, I'll speak up. I'll speak up. No, we had the challenges. We didn't ever. We were trying to finish our system up, and even the discussion took us too long to actually come up with a new pattern. And it was based on because of we are still struggling with some of the variables, and we were trying to create this loop that we could actually, like the example at the top with the current pattern, new pattern. And we were still struggling with that one. A lot of debate, a lot of discussion going on. So you see that you really need to finish up first your variables. Everyone agrees, because now we were still going back to the variables. And then because we couldn't find a good map. So we said, yeah, we're missing something. So what do we need to add to the map, or which variable that can help us in mapping it? But then, of course, you spend quite a lot of time here. So sorry, but it's a first experience. So
yeah, no worries. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That, of course, this is a very sped up exercise to so quickly go from the stories to, okay, now this is how we intervene in this pattern. That's completely normal. But I hope you still had an interesting discussion.
Absolutely, and what I think it makes you reflect upon. Like when I saw the diagrams of the other groups, you see that we were not even at that level to bring everything together into one map of the different topics, because they're all related to the similar. So you can get a more complex. But we're just starting out, so we're just trying to get our heads around how this works, how you have to define a good set of variables. So it's certainly something that you start thinking about how to better come up with these variables for the first place, because it will accelerate your the next steps.
Yeah. Then we have group number 4. Who would like to share?
These are the pros. You see these.
Yeah, I can share about our conversation. So actually, we first came up with like a title of the story of the first pattern. So we said, okay, if our first pattern is going to tell a story, it would be a vicious cycle of losing connection. So basically, not being included in the onboarding process will also lead to a lack of connection from current team members, but also from the new team member, who then feels lost. Then lack of trust goes down, familiarity goes down, team efficiency goes down, the amount of complaints about work goes up, and the team turnover also goes up. This is like the vicious cycle. And then we said, okay, the new pattern, we were playing around with trying to create interventions, which are the green post-its. And the new story would be include and match people and places to build belonging and also trust. So then we were saying, okay, involve the team in the hiring process itself so that there's connection from the start. Assign buddies so that someone doesn't feel lost. Create a team day at the office to increase familiarity. So that is kind of the way we were playing around with the new pattern.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And I also liked that you gave it titles, and it becomes very, very easy to talk about these patterns. Yeah. Thank you. Then group number 5.
I can share something because I think a few of us left as well. We took the current pattern of the relatively new temp team member, and we discussed that we should add psychological safety. We think should be in the center of our new pattern, because we believe that, well, if we add the safety and interventions on that, then it will have a positive impact for other variables. And we also discussed that if delegation leads to ownership, well, we thought no, so we deleted the line between that. And we also thought about as well, if you do not have psychological safety and if you do not have team comfort, then that will lead to team retention. So we also added this in our new pattern.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think that is a summary of what we discussed.
Yeah. Nice. I think then we have the group in The Hague as the last one. Who would like to share what you were working on?
Yeah. We realized a number of things. The patterns that rise from all of the 6 stories together is a sort of fiddling around with variables that every organization knows. And you can fiddle around endlessly with all of them. But we put it, we followed another way. We said, if this is the narrative that comes to us through these stories, what is actually missing from this narrative? And is this missing point maybe something that will change every variable in a sense? And we found it. Because when you're hearing the stories, you start thinking, what on earth are these people doing? And what is the purpose of this work, actually? Are they making lousy souvenirs for tourists? Or do they make huge windmill parks in the North Sea? Or do they have an obligation to reduce the inequality in the city? You can have an enormous variety and purpose of the organization. And the purpose itself makes an immediate impact on all of the variables. Because one of the other teams mentioned motivation, which is closely related to that. If you have a clear purpose for the whole, your motivation start, then you know immediately also what kind of information is relevant or not, whether you can feel settled with the purpose that you are working for. Will the purpose attract people or will it just eject people? So the purpose of this whole story is crucial for whatever you do with the variables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. Thank you. Then, yeah, we just have a few minutes left for now. So, yeah, I would like to tell you a little bit about if this maybe made you curious about systems mapping in general and you would like to learn more. I have a course coming up that starts now on the 2nd of April. So that's 5 sessions online, 2.5 hours. And between that, homework exercises where, yeah, together we really go through the whole systems mapping process, discuss it, practice with it, and you apply it to a specific complex challenge that is relevant to you and your work. And then, yeah, we go through that process together. So there we're really going into the details of systems mapping process. And then also, yeah, for people who need a bit more flexibility, who can't make it to these sessions of a course, I also give systems mapping coaching. So that's really one-on-one. You can schedule the sessions when you are available. And also I support you, guide you through the systems mapping process, again, working on your specific challenge. And then, of course, yeah, for the larger, really change management, team development projects, that's where World of Minds, we are collaborating on that. So if that's something you would like to learn more about or are looking for, then you can also find us here at this website. And yeah, as I mentioned before, if you're curious to hear a bit more about a specific example of what this can look like, you can have a look here at this YouTube video where, yeah, I'm going through my example and there's one other systems mapper who also showcases a project that they have worked on. And then, yeah, I would also like to say I'm very curious to kind of develop this approach further. We have, yeah, a good amount of experience at this point, starting with the stories and making them into the systems map and identifying the patterns. But we're still experimenting with different ways of, okay, how can we really tell these stories of the system afterwards and turn these patterns into engaging stories. So also looking at you, Jennifer, for example, and some other people in the room who said they have more experience with storytelling. Yeah, definitely something I'm looking to build upon further. Sidesh, you have a question.
Yeah, so my question is related to the impact assessment, which you mentioned earlier, right? So is impact assessment built into this framework or is it a separate part?
It is also related to this approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have a framework which which helps us to measure the impact of the interventions or?
So this you can also do it with storytelling. So
Okay.
it is more a combined qualitative quantitative approach.
So the
really...
post, I mean the post intervention and pre-intervention, you see the difference and calculate the impact that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or remarks for now? Then yeah,
There's one question here, Donna.
Sorry?
There's one question here.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether this is possible or if participants would even want it, but I found myself to be very curious about who is actually attending this session, since there seem to be some really interesting people doing interesting things. Maybe some people don't want the world to know that they've been secretly attending system storytelling workshops. I would be interested to know what people are doing, but maybe that's not that relevant. Anyways, it did occur to me, so I'm just
Yeah,
waiting.
but yeah, you can have a look both on the LinkedIn events, the people who clicked going there. So you can have a bit of a look at who's there to see who you want to connect to, and also on the systems innovation platform, you can see who clicked going for the events. So there you see a bit more other people interested in this and can connect with them.
Thank you.
Great.
I have a question. Sorry, Hannah, just a quick question. With regard to the stories that you put in, I'm just I'm curious as to whether or not you're always certain that you have all the right information, that you have all of the descriptive information that will allow you to then deduce the variables that will allow you to then create the systems map. I feel like sometimes when people are telling their stories, or even when you're doing the interviews and you're trying to elicit information about the system, about the situation, sometimes there is information that's missing. And it's that elusive information like, is there psychological safety within the group or is there not? Are people telling the truth, the complete truth? Are they open and transparent when they're giving these interviews, or are they holding something back for fear of reprisal? And so I feel sometimes it's really wonderful to map out all of these variables and look at them from systems perspective, but I can't help but think that sometimes there's missing info that is impeding us from actually seeing the system completely. And also, what are the connections between those systems? Something that Nora Bateson talks about when she's looking at warm data, for example. So what are those connections? What are the relationships between the variables that we're looking at that causes this relationship to either blossom or wither?
Yeah, so definitely to respond to the first part, yeah, most of the time, indeed, not all the information will be in the stories already. So, for example, what we saw happening in The Hague, as they then with the group had a closer look at the stories together, that's when they were able to see, okay, there's something missing here. So that's also why, yeah, we don't want to go from only the stories directly to the map and this is it, but always go through multiple loops of, yeah, giving the map or the variables back to the group, having the discussion around that together, and from there exploring, okay, what else is missing here? And then also definitely always also bring in, as they are needed, other facilitation methods. So yeah, maybe ideas from deep democracy are helpful in one context to, if there is yeah, a lot of tension in the group and you see there are disagreements that need to be addressed to be able to, yeah, get to the things that are more at the bottom of the iceberg. So yeah, bringing in the storytelling is one of the things that are being kind of combined with systems mapping, but also so many other ways to facilitate dialogue are needed to be brought into that process, I would say. Any other questions or observations?
Yeah, I'm interested also in how you integrate or not your own way of looking, of analyzing. So every researcher always has their own set of eyes. So how do you work with that?
So in kind of the first stage of interpreting the stories at the beginning, I try to only capture the variables that are clearly stated within the stories. and show, okay, these are the variables, these are the connections that you have talked about. And put that in the map or in the variables that I then bring into a workshop where we are working with the stakeholders. And then, of course, if I am making an observation that, okay, there's something underlying here that I see that is missing, or there are certain connections that the group doesn't see yet, yeah, I will have to think about ways to ask the right questions or provide the right exercises to help the group make those discoveries. Sidesh?
Yeah, so final question from my end. Like, I just want to ask, especially when you have a group, diverse group, where you don't know the biases and the kind of hidden agendas of the people. Maybe, like, suppose having a politician in a group who wants to build sustainable solution, but the politician has been getting funding from a lobby who wants to build a bridge, right? So that agenda is already there. So there will be a lot of tension in that. So how to take care of such situations, because there's a lot of anxiety in the room. So,
Yes. Yeah, so definitely that's also where like experience with facilitating group dialogue comes in. So I have more of the expertise on the systems mapping side of things. So for these kind of projects where I'm aware, okay, there is tension, there's a lot of potential for conflict here, I always bring in other facilitators that can work with those situations.
Yeah.
And maybe the other aspects that you were touching upon there,
Yeah.
that we need that diversity of the group to bring on all the important perspectives to have the complete image of our system. So if we're only talking to the politicians, then yeah, we will probably end up with a not very truthful view of that system.
But sometimes we have to involve them because they are the decision makers, and to convince them because we will, in such situations, we will spend a lot of time in this, but at the end, they are going to take that decision anyway. So maybe talking about it helps. Yeah, talking
but also
about it
on
helps.
the other hand, they should be in the room. They shouldn't be the only ones, but they should be.
But it was that there is another system which is holding this system back. That is the system of this lobby and politicians. So that is a mega system, right? We can't change that unless we, through voting and through democracy, we are able to somehow. But yeah, that's the challenge.
Yeah. Anything else for now that is coming up? I think then I will. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, one question. What's your advice for like the way you frame your nodes within your map? Because it sometimes can be a bit like searching for, okay, do I frame it in a negative way or in a positive way or in a neutral way so that the pluses and minuses are easy to link?
Yeah. So definitely for kind of the full systems map, there I always use the neutral way. So just we say the level of diversity, instead of saying, yeah, diversity is low or lack of diversity or things like that. But sometimes for going into actually telling the story about, okay, what is currently going on, then it can help to make it more specific and say, to talk about, okay, the team cohesion is going down, therefore people are leaving, and to really describe, okay, what are the current directions that variables are moving in, to make it more specific. All right, I think then I will close the call for today. But yeah, feel free to get in contact with me if you have other interesting thoughts and ideas around this topic. And there will be more future events around systems mapping and different related topics. So I also hope to see you in the future sessions as well.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Very much.
much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Nice workshop. Thank you.